Catherine, we're both enjoyers of the Rest is Politics podcast. I think this is our version of the Rest is Tourism because we're going to talk about where tourism features within the Irish general election and the political party manifestos.
Great. Well, delighted to be here today, and let's get straight into it and see what we've seen so far and what we can expect.
Yeah, you're CEO of AVEA, of course, the Association for Visitor Experiences and Attractions. You're also a director of ITIC, and we in ITIC came out with our own manifesto a few weeks ago at this stage, which outlined seven key asks. And it's just interesting to see where or what has been featured in the political party manifestos. I think Fine Gael were first out of the traps with their sort of business manifesto or their business supports. And one of the things that struck me was they came out with a VAT rate for the food services sector of 11%, which was interesting because obviously it's at 13.5% at the moment. We had a budget only a few weeks ago where we were lobbying for 9%, and now there's an 11% rate. So I suppose it's positive to a certain extent that they've taken on board some of the concerns of the tourism industry and are suggesting a sort of more favourable VAT rate.
Yeah, it's always interesting when you have policy manifestos coming out so soon after a budget where you think that the finances are laid down for the coming year. But there's been a sustained level of advocacy and I suppose pressure applied by tourism and hospitality over the last, well, I was going to say number of months, but really number of years
Mm.
around the moving of the VAT rate back to 9%, where it had been for a couple of years when we really needed those supports. It seems as if 11% is perhaps edging in the direction that we were looking for. Of course, 9% would be, way more preferable and in line, I think it has shown before, in line with the European norm, hanging around the 9-10%. So it seems that the applied pressure is beginning to pay off. It's a challenge when you wonder when the budget was so recent how this is now the offering that's on the table. So let's see what comes to fruition, and of course we will be seeing what colour of government is formed after this.
Yeah, I suppose we do have to take manifesto promises with a pinch of salt to a certain extent because they are promises. And what do they say? You kind of campaign in poetry, but govern in prose. And in fact, because of EU VAT rules, everything that's currently at 9%, which includes household electricity bills and commercial electricity bills, would have to go up to this new rate of 11%. So it may not fly when the actual kind of coalition parties are in negotiation. But it's an interesting sort of move by Fine Gael. They've also come out with a sort of a reduced rate of PRSI for employers, which I think would help with some of the cost of business. And in fact, that initiative was also found in the Fianna Fáil manifesto. But I think from the Fianna Fáil manifesto, the one that struck me, they didn't mention VAT at all, but the one that struck me was that they made a very clear commitment to lifting the Dublin Airport passenger cap as soon as possible, which I think is encouraging because we in the tourism industry know how important growth at Dublin Airport is to the broader tourism economy.
Well, certainly, like the cap at Dublin Airport is the long-term picture that could really stymie tourism ambitions for the next number of years. And we do have just recently launched the tourism policy released by Minister Catherine Martin just in a recent week or so. And if tourism is to continue to grow and develop, then the cap at Dublin Airport is something that's really a roadblock in the way there. Um, we know that planning is something that is intrinsically tied up with the Dublin Airport cap and how government takes a strategic national view and whether it takes the perspective that this is something of such strategic importance that a special exemption is to be made or that some negotiation is to be made with planning. I mean, that's obviously something that we'd like to see evolve at some point. But the I suppose the governance around that is something that really has to be battled out at national level as a strategic importance.
Yeah, and of course, let's not forget the regional airports, the importance of Cork and Shannon, and we in ITIC would like to see additional state aid go to those airports in line with EU permissible levels to allow them to do various kind of capex expenditure, which would allow them in turn to incentivize airlines. Because I think we all agree that there's great scope to grow in the regions, and the regional aspect of Irish tourism is so important. You know that from your members, and direct air access into the regions would be particularly beneficial.
Yeah, and collaborative marketing or cooperative marketing with the agencies like Tourism Ireland to incentivize into the regional airports has worked very well for different tourism agencies and local authorities right across Europe, as we've seen. So again, there are opportunities there. Like I know both Cork and Shannon are ambitious to develop further, and there's been talk too of Ireland Midwest, which is doing very well. So these are opportunities. I mean, I think it's widely accepted that Dublin Airport is the key that unlocks the island. So we do need to retain the focus on that while also seeking to develop the airports that are non-Dublin.
Yeah, absolutely. Competitiveness and connectivity, I think, are the two big C's, along obviously with cost of business. Sinn Féin haven't published their full manifesto yet. I think they're kind of maybe tactically waiting a little bit longer, but we do know they're in favour of 9% for, again, the food services sector. So ironically, Sinn Féin, which maybe wouldn't be the most pro-business party, traditionally, are actually suggesting the lowest rate of VAT for the food services sector. But I think from our perspective, we'd like it to be extended beyond just food services, wouldn't we?
Yeah, I mean, consistency in the VAT rate, if there is to be the one VAT rate, then it would make sense that, that the 9% prevail across all of the areas. Food and beverage is a really important element of the visitor attraction offering as well, particularly outside of Dublin, where destinations, would do well out of their food and beverage, and also the local domestic markets. Like last weekend, I was in Killarney in Mucker's House. The cafe was busy with like not just international visitors, but also local. So anything that enables people to spend extra money and not always be counting the change
Yeah.
in the food and beverage offering, and also how they spend their leisure time, because we are talking predominantly about international tourism, but we're also talking about the ability of the domestic market to spend on tourism experiences as well.
Yeah, yeah. And just moving to the Greens, obviously we have a Green minister, Catherine Martin, who's just finishing her term. She may be back in office in a few weeks' time, or may not. They've published their manifesto, and a big focus on public transport, which I think is important internally. Also, they're talking about robust regulations on the short-term rental sector, which is something they've talked about for some time. But that public transport thing, that connectivity within Ireland, that's very important, isn't it?
It is. I mean, the commitment to Metrolink is something that, has long been on the list, on the shopping list. And I suppose we'd love to see like a committed plan that gives like a finish date on that, budget allocated to that, and everything incorporated into a program for government, whatever that might look like. But also, I mean, my own view is that the Greens did make some huge inroads, no pun intended, into connectivity within the island, in terms of like bus connects and reducing the pricing on public transport as well, which has made it much more attractive and much more competitive. There also is the increased rail link between Dublin and Belfast, which is one of the most important corridors in and out of Northern Ireland. And we'd also like to see the promised investment in the EV infrastructure rolled out. Getting into the heartlands, getting into the regions is really important.
Yeah.
And if our fleet of cars is going to become increasingly electrically powered, then we need to make sure that people aren't having that range anxiety,
Yeah.
particularly visitors who are, perhaps new to an area. So having the rollout completed of the AVEA infrastructure into the destination visitor attractions is something we'd love to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, of course, there's a plethora of other parties. There's Labour, the Social Democrats. There's lots and lots of independents. We don't quite know, obviously, how the election is going to pan out. I think what's important, though, is that we, as an industry, continue to amplify the tourism issues as much as possible. And an industry database will be listening to this. And I suppose when industry players meet politicians looking for their vote, we need to say firmly and proudly that this is the country's largest Indigenous industry. It's the biggest regional employer, and it really matters.
Absolutely. And, it's likely, I think the speculation in the media is that we're going to have some form of coalition government. And really, the detail will be when the programme for government is negotiated amongst all of those parties and what that looks like. And we've been to the forefront right up to, in advance of the budget, and now, our ongoing advocacy around the key issues that are facing us, they have to remain front and central. I suppose if you do have a canvasser coming to your door, it's often the response is to speak about, the personal end
Yeah,
of how, a new government is going to impact on you. And there are many, many pressing issues facing the country, whether it's health, housing, education, etc. But from a
yeah,
business perspective, I suppose we all need to remember that we've got that responsibility as well throughout the country to try and get the messaging across around the importance of tourism jobs right throughout the country, which, as you say, often are the only game in town in some rural or regional pockets, and employing 1 in 9, which is a number that I know ITIC stands over and has been
yeah,
validated. So these voices need to be heard. Like I know earlier on in the week, the party leaders went specifically to meet the farming lobby,
yeah,
and I think tourism and hospitality employ more people than agri-food
absolutely.
does in the country. So the cohesive voice that comes in behind ITIC is really, really important.
Yeah. And as you say, there'll be a coalition of some sort. So lots of these manifesto promises will get watered down to a certain extent. I think what's important, though, is that tourism in the next program for government, in the next administration, is really thought of as a critical economic engine for the country. So all the issues, whether it's the airport passenger cap, whether it's competitiveness, whether it's connectivity throughout the island, whether it's taxation, they need to be put through a very clear economic lens.
Yeah, I mean, the economic value has been argued before, and there's certainly, a case to be made for tourism to sit underneath an economic portfolio. For example, enterprise, which is where the hospitality, like the food business end of things, currently sits, and it would make sense that we're in the one family together. Underneath an economic ministry or a junior minister for tourism, whatever that might look like at the end of
Yeah.
the day.
Yeah. Great. Well, listen, we'll know more in a couple of weeks. I think election date, I think, is November 29th. There's going to be probably lots of sort of negotiations after that. So it'll be a while before we see the, if you like, the hue of the next government. But thanks for your time, and let's keep making the tourism argument as loud as possible.
Thanks for talking to me today, Anne.